My name is Aaron Wagner, and I will be talking about the lack of education funding in Colorado. I'm hoping to make everyone, including parents, children, teachers, and other legislators in other states, aware of the situations that are caused because of the lack of education funding provided by your state. The lack of education funding in Colorado needs to be fixed. The state has a problem with funding equally and appropriately. 3 reasons why the lack of funding is a problem in Colorado is because of the unequal distribution between low and high level school districts. Also, the lack of education funding can result in changes in school finances within Colorado, and by the lack of education funding that impacts school districts by having them have to make budget cuts across the board. All 3 of these reasons are important issues that may happen if your state lacks education funding. The problem is that Colorado has an issue with funding school districts in their state appropriately, and change needs to happen within the state if they want to see success throughout all economic levels of school districts. Students living in rich areas cannot keep having advantages over other students in other school districts throughout Colorado just because of the amount of money they're provided. The lack of education funding in Colorado is a major problem, and the state needs to take action to appropriately fund all school districts throughout the state. Colorado has an unequal distribution between low and high level school districts throughout the state and is one of 18 states that has no difference in tax percentage variation. Also, the average amount of taxpayer dollars is significantly higher in high income areas, and those students still receive the same amount or more than other students. All I ask for is for students who may live in poverty to receive more funding to help with disadvantages in their school. Secondly, the lack of education funding can result in changes with school finances in Colorado. Wealthy communities can raise their tax dollars to increase the amount of money going towards schools, but low poverty communities cannot do the same. Taxes need to be different throughout areas of Colorado based on socioeconomic status and the amount of education funding, or the state legislature needs to support communities in poverty with increased funding. For example, if an increase in education funding is not given to low-income public schools, their financials will eventually force change because cities like Denver are very eager to tax themselves for less important projects. Funding should be targeted towards real adjustments within schools, from an increase in teachers' salary to motivating better learning performance, as well as ready-to-work students. Lastly, the lack of education funding impacts school districts by having them have to make budget cuts across the board in many school districts. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, tax collections have fallen due to people buying less, which results in decreased amounts of money for schools. And less money means less spending and support. The Colorado Department of Education told Colorado's 178 school districts to plan for cuts between 1 and 10%, but many are preparing for cuts much bigger than that, according to the Learning Policy Institute school finance specialist Michael Griffith. Once some school districts apply these cuts, it creates difficulties for schools to recover from the financial hole they were put in. However, I suggest a raise of taxes among the wealthy in Colorado in order to make up for the lack of funding and cuts throughout school districts. Another suggestion would be to have across-the-board salary cuts, pay freezes, dipping in the reserves, merging smaller schools, or just adjusting school time to save money. Districts throughout Colorado only have school 4 days a week because most school districts simply cannot afford 5 days of school because of the budget cuts that happen due to lack of education funding. The blue are all schools that have 4-day school weeks, and green is multiple schools in that school district that have 4-day school weeks. In all, students living in low economic areas need more financial support from the state in order for those students to have an even level learning field compared to all other students in Colorado. Think about your state and if they provide additional services or funding to students from low poverty areas. As you can see, Colorado as a whole is not very stable financially, and taxpayers need to pay equal taxes among school districts along with stabilizing the school system in Colorado. Colorado is not just behind in education, but also behind in the national average of taxpayer dollars. In Boulder County, 9.7% of people are in poverty, 2.6% of people are in poverty in Douglas County, 17.2% in Pueblo County, 7.5% in poverty in Aspen. In Cheyenne County, the poverty rate is at 12.6%, and lastly, the poverty rate in Elizabeth County is at 5.6%. As you can see, there's little difference in spending among various school districts between the lowest county in poverty, which is Douglas County, and between the highest county in poverty, which is Pueblo County. Something that is evident is that Douglas County receives additional spending, which almost completely evens them out with Pueblo County when it comes to per person spending. However, Cheyenne County, on the other hand, has 12.6% of its population in poverty, and they receive the highest per-person spending among school districts. The inequality between these districts in Colorado is evident because of the amount of per-person spending and additional spending compared to the poverty rate that each county is at. In conclusion, here is a map of the United States that shows the absentee rates in each state, and Colorado is one of the highest states that has chronically absent students compared to the rest of the United States. This shows that better funding in states allows for more students to come to school and be successful learners. To wrap it up, I hope you all enjoyed my presentation, and here are my sources that correlate with all the pictures you've seen throughout this Pecha-Kucha. Thank you for watching.